Why I asked Parliament a question about your skin. In January 2026, a question was submitted to the UK Parliament. It asked the government to account for the impact of standard vitamin D guidelines on people with higher melanin concentration. That question had my name on it. And today I want to share with you why I asked it and what happened next. Welcome to Indigenous Intelligence. I'm Nii Okyne. I'm Ga, originally from Gamashi in Accra, Ghana. And this podcast exists because I believe that the knowledge of our ancestors carried, knowledge that was disrupted, dismissed, and in many cases deliberately buried, is not only still relevant. In many cases, it turns out to be the more scientifically accurate than what we replaced it with. Today's episode is about one of the most powerful examples of that. And it starts not in a lab or in a parliamentary building. It really just starts with the sun. I want to take you back to when I first started asking the question that eventually ended up in Parliament. I've been living in the UK for a number of years, and I noticed something. Not in a science paper, but just in everyday life. But black and brown people seem to be struggling with their health in ways that didn't always make sense, given how much they were trying to do the right things. So then I started reading, and I came across something that stopped me in my tracks. What we call vitamin D, the thing doctors test for, the thing health agencies, the NHS tells you to supplement in winter, is not actually a vitamin. It is a hormone. Okay, your body produces it, and the process begins with sunlight on your skin. Now here's what I now understand. The synthesis pathway runs in 3 stages. The sun hits your skin and produces the parent compound, cholecalciferol. Your liver converts that into calcidiol, sometimes called the pre-hormone. And then finally your kidneys activate it into calcitriol, the biologically active hormone that your immune system, your bones, your mood, your cell function all depend on. Now here is where it gets important. Melanin, the pigment that gives darker skin its color, absorbs ultraviolet light. That's its job. It is a protective. But when darker skin are in northern latitudes where the UV levels are already low, melanin-rich skin absorbs so much of the available UV that not enough gets through to begin that synthesis pathway properly. This is not a dietary guide. It's not about eating the right foods either. This is an endocrine disruption, a hormonal disruption. It's been caused by an evolutionary mismatch between melanin-rich skin and the latitudes where millions of people of African and South Asian descent now live. And the guidelines that are supposed to address this, the health recommendations, the NHS recommendations, the supplementation advice, were designed without this population adequately in mind. It makes me wonder why so many of us are struggling in ways we cannot always name. Now here's where that thing moved me most when I started understanding this. Ga people, people of African descent, already know this. Maybe not in the language of endocrinology, or not in the language of peer-reviewed journals, but in practice. In the way they organize their days, their ceremonies, their relationship to the sun, the earth, and the animals. They had a symbiotic relationship with these things. A lot of Africans begin their days outside. A lot of indigenous people walk around barefoot, not just Africans, indigenous people. They spend time in the sun, in the morning light, and they stay out of the sun when the sun peaks. Okay, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who lives in an indigenous community working underneath the hot sun. Typically, people would wake up at dawn, try and get as much work done till the sun is at its peak. And then they would, maybe sit under trees or seek shelter. But they didn't actively spend time when the sun was at its peak. Similarly, when you look at animals in the Serengeti, for example, you notice that animals can overheat when the sun's at its peak. So even predatory animals don't normally hunt when the sun is at its peak because they can overheat. And Africans have always kind of mimicked the behaviors of the animals around them. I believe that it is more than likely that we learned a lot of things from observing the animals around us. We were observing nature, so we observe the animals as well. Okay, now this is not coincidence. It's knowledge that they had, and it's been refined across generations about what our bodies need. Ghans have a festival called hormone, and it means to hoot at hunger. And born from a famine survived. Now, yearly, the Ghana people return to their ancestral homes during the harvest season. And the dates for that festival are set through a system called Tekomo. 2 priests from 2 different lineages observe the sky independently and reconcile their findings. Only when they agree is the date determined for Omowo. That in itself is a peer-reviewed system. That is the scientific method, practiced in Gamashi centuries before it was formalized into European institutions. This is what I mean when I talk about indigenous intelligence. The knowledge it's always been there. It's not primitive. It's not superstitious. This is what science is, encoded in ceremony, carried in practice, transmitted through oral tradition, because that is how knowledge travels when you do not have a paper. So what modern science is doing now is not discovering something new. It's catching up with something ancient. And I think that matters enormously, not just academically, but for how we understand ourselves, our bodies, and our place in the world. So why Parliament? Well, because policy is where knowledge becomes action, or doesn't it? The UK government has guidelines about vitamin D. They recommend that everyone, regardless of skin tone, regardless of where they live, regardless of their melanin concentration, take a supplement of 10 micrograms per day in the autumn and winter months. People with darker skin are told to consider supplementing year-round. That is the same recommendation for everyone. One size fits all. But the data tells a different story. UK Biobank data shows that 57% of South Asian Britons and 38% of Black British have inadequate vitamin D synthesis in winter and spring. Now compare that to 17% of white Britons. That's a pretty huge gap. And that's a systemic failure dressed up as guidance. So in January 2026, working with my local MP, Clive Jones, who represents the town in which I live, Wokingham, I submitted Parliamentary Question 106242. We asked the government to formally account for the impact of standard vitamin D guidelines on people with higher melanin concentrations. On the 12th of February 2026, the government responded. They announced that the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, SACN, would conduct a rapid review of vitamin D requirements specifically for people with higher melanin concentration. Now, that was the first time in British parliamentary history that the government formally acknowledged that current guidelines may not adequately serve Black and South Asian populations. And that review is now on the Secretary of State's desk. I wanted to just to sit with that for a moment, because I think it's easy to hear that and move on, but think about what it means. Generations of Black and South Asian people in this country have been underserved by health guidelines that was not designed with their bodies in mind. And a single parliamentary question rooted in ancestral knowledge, backed by modern science, moved an institution that rarely moves quickly. This is what happens when indigenous intelligence meets the right moment. Now, this is not specific to the UK. The numbers in the US and in other northern countries, countries within the northern hemisphere, are seeing vitamin D deficiencies and insufficiencies. So the review is happening now, but the government has also confirmed that it is not planning any interim measures while the review concludes, which means the gap between what the guidelines say and what people's body need continues right now, today. That is why the community work matters as much as the policy work. So on Saturday mornings, I run a grounding session at Cantley Park in Wokingham. I walk barefoot on the grass, some morning sun practice. I try to explain the science in plain language. People take their shoes off and stand in the light. Some of them for the first time in years. Like 3 weeks ago, I had 3 South Asian women who came. And after the session, one of them said, "My ancestors used to do this. We have just forgotten." That is Indigenous Intelligence in action. This August, I'm taking a small group to Gamashi for the Homowo Festival, to stand in the streets where this knowledge originated, to meet the Wulome, to learn about Tekomo, to walk past James Fort, built by the Royal African Company in 1673, that same institution that funded Edward Colston in Bristol, and to understand that the disconnection from ancestral knowledge and the disconnection from ancestral land are the same story. And in the academic world, I'm building relationships with researchers at Queen Mary University London, the University of Manchester, University College Cork, Penn State, Loughborough University, and the Quadram Institute, all working on different pieces of the same question. What happens to melanin-rich bodies when they're separated from conditions their biology was shaped by? The Parliamentary Question was one moment in a much larger conversation. So is this podcast. If you're listening to this and you have darker skin and you live at a northern latitude in the UK, in Canada, in the US, in Northern Europe, I would like you to know that what you've been told about your health is not the complete picture. You're not deficient. You're mismatched. And that distinction really matters. Get outside in the morning sun when you can. Take your shoes off when the ground is there to receive you. And if you have a doctor, make an appointment and ask them to check your vitamin D levels. Not just whether you are deficient by a standard threshold, but where you actually sit. Your body knows more than the guidelines I've given it credit for. That's what Indigenous Intelligence is about. Thank you for making time to listen. If the episode resonated with you, by all means share it with someone who needs to hear it. You can find me on LinkedIn and on Instagram, and if you'd like to join a Saturday morning grounding session at Cantley Park in Wokingham, message grounding to me on LinkedIn. See you next time.